everyone, and welcome back to a new video. I am so glad that you're here. Welcome to a bit of a catch-up video and a little bit of a recent reads video as well. I had such a crazy month. August was absolutely insane. I honestly feel like I was in a whirlwind. I barely read in August, and I'm so glad that I'm finally coming out of this funk that I've been in, just because it has been very difficult. I'm not going to get into details as to what's been going on, but a lot has been going on, and I feel like I've been in a bit of survival mode for the last couple of months, but mainly the month of August, and things are looking up. Thank God things are looking up for this month, and I'm hopeful the rest of the year will just be a more peaceful time because this summer has not been. But I am not wanting to bring any negativity to this video. I just want to talk about the books that I have read over the last couple of months. So that will be July and August, and just talk books and really kick this reading slump caused by other things in the butt. It needs to go. And thankfully I actually have picked up 2 books for the first time in I would think 3 weeks that I've been able to actually focus. I picked up 2 books, one of them being Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. It is my first time reading through the Harry Potter series. I grew up in the type of household where Harry Potter was very much frowned upon just for religious purposes, and I'm still very much a believer in, stick to your convictions. For me personally, after having seen the movies, I don't feel that there's anything wrong with it for me personally, and I really wanted to read the books. So I started with the first one. It is for the readathon that one of my lovely friends, Cheryl, at the Candlewick Library is hosting, and she has other hosts as well. I'll leave her announcement video for this readathon linked below. It's for the entire month of September with lots of fun prompts that have to do with the different classes held at Hogwarts, and it's just so fun. So I at least wanted to read one book, even though I'm keeping myself, low pressure. I'm not gonna try to fulfill specific prompts. I'm not, gonna go too hard in, but I did want to read the first Harry Potter book, and I'm loving it so far. So that is the first book. And I'm also reading Madam Will You Talk by Mary Stewart. I actually do have my copy here. Here we are. So I am just over halfway through Madam Will You Talk, and I've been listening while physically reading, but also while working on a puzzle. So it's been such a fun book. It is a romantic suspense story, which isn't really my cup of tea, but I'm finding these are the perfect stories to just kind of, lose myself in and not have to pay too much attention when reading. Although I will say it has been very gripping. I have found myself just so in love with the descriptions of the French countryside and the different cities that our main character Charity has traveled through, driven through, and she's kind of being chased by this sinister man, and things are not as they seem, and there's this young boy that she's unintentionally become kind of like a protector for him. And it's really interesting. It is suspense. It's not so much mystery, but it's really, really great. And it's a classic as well. I think it was published in the 40s or 50s. And I've only read one other Mary Stewart, and I'm blanking on the title. I think The Moon Spinners is what it's called. And I really enjoyed that as well. But this is my second by her, and I definitely will read more. It's such a fun kind of palate cleanser read, and it's also a perfect summertime read as it is set just along the Mediterranean coast in Provence, France. So I'm really, really loving this one. So thankfully those 2 books are really helping me get out of this funk that I've been in with reading and with life and with everything. But I am gonna now go over the books that I read in July and August. I'll first go over the books I read for Jane Austen July. I read a really good number for Jane Austen July, but I don't know, I think I was pushing through a lot of books to get them done rather than being able to fully enjoy them the way that I want to. And the whole mental whirlwind and mental, reading block really started in July, but I kept pushing and pushing and pushing until finally in August, I just had to pause reading for a few weeks, and it was much needed. But I will go over the Jane Austen books, and a couple of them I did have to carry over into August, so I didn't finish everything in July, but I'll talk about them roughly in the order that I read them. I feel so disorganized right now. I also forgot to mention, with everything going on, I DNF'd a lot, but I'm not gonna go over all the DNFs. I didn't even keep a list of what I did try to read and did not finish. Some of them I will probably try again, some of them not the type of book that I want to read, so a lot of DNFing happened as well in July mainly. But moving on to Jane Austen July. So for Jane Austen July, there were several prompts, and I met 3 of the 7, and then a 4th one I just finished the book today. So it took me about a month and a half to read, or almost 2 months actually. So the prompts that I did meet were to read one of Jane Austen's 6 main novels, and I read Emma for that prompt, to read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen or her time, and I read Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney, which is the book that I just finished. And then for another prompt, it was to read a retelling of a Jane Austen work or a work set in her time. And I read a few books for that. I read Miss Austen by Jill Hornby, What Kitty Did Next by Carrie Cableen, Colonel Brandon in His Own Words, I forget the author's name, and Jeremy Poldark by Winston Graham. So those 4 were read for that, as they were all set in Jane Austen's time, or inspired by one of her work. And then the 4th one that I did meet was to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, and I read Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth. So I did read a good number of books for Jane Austen July, although not all of them were hits, which is totally fine, but many of them were very enjoyable. And I'll talk about them in the rough order that I read them, as I mentioned. First up is Miss Austen by Jill Hornby, and in this one we have Jane Austen's sister Cassandra as our main character, and it opens in 1840, and she's returning to the village of Kintbury and the parsonage there where the Fowles live. And the reason she's there is to basically look for and destroy any last remaining letters written by Jane, anything to do with Jane that would possibly ruin her reputation. These are also fictional letters. Most of Jane Austen's letters were actually destroyed, so we don't know a lot of what she would have written to her different friends about, but in this book it kind of imagines what it would have been like if Cassandra knew about this, you know, potential treasure trove of letters with all these family secrets, and she was determined that these secrets would not be revealed to the public. So that's kind of what the story is about. And we have different side characters as well, each going through their own, you know, struggles, and it's a really beautiful story. As Cassandra is reading a lot of the letters that she does find, it flashes back to her teenage years with Jane and Cassandra's engagement to Tom Fowle, who sadly passed away before they were able to marry. And it's just such a moving story, and like I said, it's very melancholic. It's very slow and gentle, and I really, really loved the portrayal of sisterly devotion between Jane and Cassandra. I really love novels that explore sisterhood. It's one of my favorite things to read about. I really appreciated that nothing in the story to me felt far-fetched or like it couldn't have happened if it did happen, and I just really enjoyed how Jane was portrayed, and the writing was beautiful and felt very true to the time period and these characters. What did bring it down just a little bit was how slow and gentle and I guess very contemplative the story is, and it's not always my cup of tea. Sometimes I can very much enjoy stories like that, and I did very much enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't the perfect 5-star read for me, but I did very, very much enjoy the portrayal of grief, and I also really enjoyed the audiobook. I did listen to the audiobook while physically reading, and it's narrated by Juliet Stevenson, which was just wonderful. Her narration is the absolute best out of every female narrator I have listened to. I think she's my favorite. She is fantastic. I did want to share my favorite quote from the story, and Cassandra is in essence trying to encourage Isabella, who is one of the Fowles' daughters. Isabella was a real person as well, and what I did like was at the beginning there is a list of characters from the different families, so the Fowles, the Lloyds, and the Austens. So that was really helpful. But in this little passage here, it's kind of a sentiment that Cassandra is trying to, I guess, encourage Isabella with. Happy endings are there for us somewhere, woven into the mix of life's fabric. We just have to search the detail, follow the pattern, to find the one that should be our own. I just thought that was beautifully written. I enjoyed seeing little snippets of Jane's career as an author and different moments where different works by her were published and how Cassandra would have maybe, you know, experienced Jane's joy or even lack of optimism with the different books that she wrote. And it was just so great and really, really touching. But ultimately it was just a little too depressing for me, which again, I have read very depressing works and have given them 5 stars, and it's not that that's something I can't read and can't enjoy, but it just had a morose quality to it, especially the passage where Cassandra is there beside Jane as she passes away. That was a very poignant passage to read, but kind of a sad way to conclude the book, and it's not a spoiler. Jane Austen passed away, and that's how the story ends in this book, but either way, 4 stars. I did very much enjoy it, and I do think this is a book I would reread in the future. I did start the miniseries, and I don't know, I wasn't really... I have to try it again. I had tried watching it just after finishing this, so maybe now that there's been some time, I'll enjoy it a lot more. But anyways, that was Miss Austen, and I did very much enjoy it. I also read Colonel Brandon in His Own Words by Shannon Winslow, and this was a really fun, I guess, retelling of Sense and Sensibility, but from Colonel Brandon's perspective. But it wasn't just a straight retelling. I really enjoyed that it explored Colonel Brandon as a teenager and his first love, who was Eliza, and how that all kind of, you know, didn't work out. And I think the author did a really good job of showing Colonel Brandon's, I guess, more empathetic and deeply feeling melancholic nature and why he is the way he is in Sense and Sensibility. And I thought it was a solid retelling. I did give it 3.75 stars. The thing for me is, even if things like characterization and even the, I guess, original story, like staying true to the original story, and the characterization was pretty faithful in terms of Jane Austen's characters, it's still not Jane Austen, and it's very difficult for me to enjoy a book that is retelling a Jane Austen story when the writing is so clearly different. And it's just not Austen. And I have to keep telling myself not to judge a book by another author's writing style. It's not fair to the author who wrote that book, but my brain just keeps doing that. It keeps going, this isn't Austen, this isn't, the way that she would have described this scene or that scene, or, this character wouldn't have said things this way or whatnot. But different writing styles, it's just part of the course. This book was also a bit melodramatic, which kind of it was just a bit too much for me, but it was very enjoyable. There are certain things mentioned in Sense and Sensibility that we don't see play out. For example, a duel that is fought between Colonel Brandon and one of the best antagonists written by Austen, and we get to see that play out in this book, which was fun. And we also get to follow Colonel Brandon to India, which was really interesting, and his time there when he was in the Navy. And that was really interesting as well. I think the author did a really good job. Just there was something missing for me in the writing, and even with Colonel Brandon's characterization. In Sense and Sensibility, it feels almost like he's behind this veil and we don't really get to truly see him. And, the depth of his character, we don't get to see much of that. And that's not what the story's about. But with this one, it does show a bit more of him. Certain things the author chose to give his character, I don't know, I'm not sure I was a big fan of. But anyways, all that to say, it was a decent retelling and I thought it was really enjoyable, and I read it on Kindle. I spent a lot of time reading it actually during my work lunches, and it was fun to, read it over the course of July and dip in and out of it, and I had a great time. And I really enjoyed seeing the events of Sense and Sensibility and other characters like Mrs. Jennings and John Middleton from Colonel Brandon's perspective. I thought that was very fun, and in fact, it did make me love Sense and Sensibility even more, and I would probably now consider it to be my second favorite Jane Austen work after Pride and Prejudice. I love that book so much, and I did reread it earlier this year and fell in love with it to a whole new level compared to the first time I read it. So it definitely made me appreciate the story even more, and I would recommend. I thought it was great. I also read What Kitty Did Next by Carrie Cableen, and this was a buddy read with my lovely friend Jacqueline, and we both very much enjoyed this story. It is basically Kitty's story after the events of Pride and Prejudice. Before starting the book, I was so curious to see how the author would tell us Kitty's story. We often talk about Mary falling in the shadows of Jane and Elizabeth, but Kitty really does fall in Lydia's shadow, even though Kitty is the second youngest. And I feel like, I guess with how obnoxious and out there Lydia is, it's really easy for someone like Kitty, who kind of just follows like a puppy, to fall in her shadows, which is interesting with Lydia being the youngest. But I was so interesting to see how her character would be portrayed, developed, all of that, and I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very well written, very well done, and I was pretty well hooked from the beginning and very much enjoyed it. It starts off with Kitty as a very insecure 19-year-old girl. She just keeps replaying the things she hears from her family in her mind, specifically from her father, that she's just a spoiled, silly child. To kind of get away from everything, she spends some time with Jane and Mr. Bingley in London and enters the art world there. She enters the world of music and theater and the visual arts, and just kind of starts to flourish and develop passions that she didn't realize she had. While in London, she meets some really interesting side characters. We meet Sir Edward, who is a very sweet, middle-aged gentleman. He kind of reminded me of Mr. Weston from Emma, just a very sweet man, and his nephews, the Fanshawe brothers. And she also meets this man who becomes kind of her music tutor, and his name is Henry. And it's just so fun, and we kind of, you don't really know where her story is going to go. Is she going to form an attachment to one of these men? What's going to happen? And I love that that's the title, What Kitty Did Next. What will she do? That's kind of your question as you're reading the story. What is the next thing that she's going to do? And, what will she fully invest her time and energy in? And what is it that will bring her fulfillment? Like, what is the next thing that she's going to experience? We get to see Elizabeth and Darcy and Georgiana, and she and Kitty become fast friends, which was really fun. And we have to endure more of Caroline Bingley, which she is just awful, and her characterization was spot on in this book. Basically, all the characters were very well portrayed in this story, and I think the author did a great job of staying true to how Austen wrote her characters, which was wonderful. Lydia shows up later on, and things go awry, and it's fun. It's just a whole bunch of things happening, kind of like in Pride and Prejudice, people going to different people's homes and balls and drama and all of that, and it's really, really fun. I will say it's not as well paced, in my opinion, as Jane Austen's works, and I did feel a little like I was slogging through from, I would say, the halfway point to about 3/4 of the way through. I kind of started to struggle a bit. The first half was definitely 5-star material, and it kind of did dip for me, so I'm landing on around a 4-star rating. I guess my difficulty reading really started when I was also halfway through this book, so I don't know how much of that has to do with the fact that I was just not doing very well in the few weeks that I was trying to finish this book. And either way, there were so many things about it that I enjoyed, and I would love to reread it in the future as well. And with Kitty exploring music, we get to experience concerts with her, and there are so many references to different composers of the time and artists of the time, and it's just wonderful. I loved all the music references. One of my favorite quotes just about the music says, "She thought the music sublime, reverential, as if it were reaching into her soul, providing a balm, a release, and something akin to joy." The writing was also so descriptive and beautiful. Another passage here says, "Kitty had not expected the musicians to be in such colorful costume, some wearing shades of crimson or forest green, and although at least half of them were quite young, all were wearing beribboned horsehair wigs, lending them an almost regal air. She liked the theatricality of it. It added to the occasion. Only a few more candles remained to be lit, and the room was already bright and warm," etc., etc. And yeah, I thought it was well written, engaging, and I also like that it's partially epistolary as Kitty kind of forays into writing. She starts by writing letters to Lydia, but they're letters that she doesn't actually send her. It's more like just writing, what's going on in her life, kind of like a diary, but she does address them to Lydia, and she also realizes that she is good at writing. And so there's just all these things that she's experiencing, and you're not quite sure what will be that thing that, brings her joy, brings her fulfillment as you're reading. And it's a really fun story to kind of, go on Kitty's journey with her, and it is wonderful. There were some very moving and poignant moments as well towards the end. I did feel myself a little emotional, but overall, a great book, a great reimagining of Kitty's story post Pride and Prejudice. A really good one, would definitely recommend. I also read Jeremy Poldark by Winston Graham, and it was about time. I read Ross Poldark and Demelza, which are the first 2 books in this series, this very long series, and this is book 3. I read those 2 books, I think 3 years ago. I think Demelza was 3 years ago, Ross Poldark even longer. Obviously, it's the first book. But I just let so much time go by after reading Demelza and did not continue the series, and I am so mad at myself. I do know like the rough gist of what happens because I've watched the TV series multiple times now. If you've never watched Poldark, it is so great. Highly recommend the show, but I started the series after watching the TV series for the first time, and I'm just loving it. This book was so good. I gave it 4.5 stars as well. I can't say too much about the plot just because it does start right after the end of Demelza, but in this one, Ross Poldark, who is our main character, he is facing trial for something he was accused of in book 2, and it is kind of that story. The first half of this book is his trial, and it had me on the edge of my seat, even though I knew how it would end. I just can't get enough of this author's writing. He can write such tension, and it's just so good. Maybe I should tell you what the series is about if you have never heard of it, but Poldark is set in the late 18th century after the end of the Revolutionary War in America, and our main character Ross fought on the British side. He comes back after, they were defeated, and he learns that his father died. He lives in Cornwall, so he comes back to his home on the Cornish coast, and the estate is just in ruins. His father is the younger brother, or was the younger brother of a wealthier landowner, and Ross has to kind of figure out what to do about his livelihood, like how to make money, how to make ends meet, if he should revive his father's old mines. And he needs to do this because he has all these tenants depending on him, and he is their landlord. He has to be able to provide for them, and it is just so good. It is a wonderful exploration of starting from scratch when you literally have nothing, no money. You've just come back from war. You're a young man with absolutely nothing. The woman he was in love with also marries his cousin, and that is the first book. And then he meets someone, and it's his romance as well, and it's just so good. I love this series so much. Oh my gosh. And I can't wait to read book 4, but I really loved this one. The reason it wasn't a full 5 stars, the second half was just a bit of a slog after the really fast-paced kind of, edge of my seat feeling that I got in the first half. I really, really appreciate how the author portrays different marital difficulties and trials and the loss of children, and it's not a series for the faint of heart. There are very difficult things explored in each book. George Warlegan is one of the best villains I have ever read, and he is just terrible, and anytime he's on page I want to punch him in the face. And I also love Judd and Prudy. They are hilarious, Ross's servants, and there's a specific scene that I knew was coming, but it still made me laugh out loud with Judd, and I just love this series and I love these characters. And I would also recommend physically reading while listening to the audiobook because there is dialect with the Cornwall setting, more so when the, I guess, people of the lower social classes are speaking. They speak more with dialect, and it's kind of sometimes difficult to understand. For anyone familiar with Harry Potter, Hagrid's accent is similar to how they would talk in Cornwall. So that kind of accent, if you're physically reading, it helps me as well when I'm physically reading. But I just love this series. Anytime something inconveniences me, I feel like breaking out in Judd's very iconic tidn't right, tidn't fit, tidn't fair, tidn't friendly, and I probably butchered the order of that and the pronunciation. But anyways, that is his iconic saying, and every time I read it, I smile. This series, I love it. Would highly recommend the Poldark series. Then I have 3 more books for Jane Austen July, 2 of which I finished in August, and 1 of which I finished this morning in September. And that is okay. It's just how life has been. I read Belinda by Mariah Edgeworth, and I gave this book 3 stars. I thought it was good. I enjoyed aspects of it, and I didn't dislike it by any means, but I just didn't love it. I didn't enjoy it as much as I was expecting. We have Belinda, who she leaves her aunt's house. She was orphaned, so she grew up under her aunt's care, and she moves to London to live with Lady Delacour and I guess kind of enter the marriage market, if you will. And it is a novel of courtship, and Lady Delacour is a really, really interesting and very annoying character, and Belinda's just kind of trying to survive. There are different men vying for her attention, and it was interesting. I didn't particularly like any character or find myself invested in the story very much, but I was entertained. I will just read what I wrote on Goodreads. I said, I enjoyed aspects of this story, but overall it was a bit of a slog to get through. Lady Delacour annoyed me to no end, and I found Belinda a little dull. I see so many little things that Austen was likely inspired by in writing some of her books, which is interesting. It's an accessible read and has some funny moments, but overall it's not a story that I loved. And that basically summarizes how I felt about it. As I was reading, I enjoyed aspects of it, but found myself very, very annoyed by Lady Delacour, and it was interesting to see Belinda develop. She did kind of become a lot more assertive, and she did show some vivacity and spunk at times, and it was interesting, and I didn't know where it would go. The ending was interesting. I'm not sure I'm a fan of how things ended, but yeah, I don't know. I didn't particularly like it all that much, but I didn't dislike it at the same time. So 3 stars is what I landed on. It was fine. Interesting book. Not sure it was for me though. I also read Emma by Jane Austen, and this was the group read and a reread for me. This was my second time reading it. I read it for the first time, I think 3 years ago, and the first time I read it, I said that it was probably my favorite, kind of tied with Pride and Prejudice. This second time around, I still very much enjoyed this book. I still love Emma and Mr. Knightley as characters, but I do think I prefer both Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility over Emma, which is really interesting. But I feel like every time I reread her works, my, I guess, ranking will slightly change. It also depends on my reading mood and everything, but as of now, it's definitely not my favorite. I would say it's probably a 4.75 out of 5 stars. If we're being technical, which numerical ratings aren't, they're not everything. But anyways, this book, I have so many thoughts. I took a lot of notes on it because I had so many thoughts as I was reading, and I wanted to really pay attention to each character and their motives, and this was very thought-provoking, and there are so many interesting themes that Austen explores. Emma and Mr. Knightley are definitely 2 of my favorite characters. Mr. Knightley is probably my top love interest as of now. Even though this isn't my top book, the ranking for the characters, they would be near the top. That is for sure. I do think I'm going to film a separate video about Emma just because I could spend a lot of time talking about it and the characters. So what I'm just going to say is what I shared on Goodreads. I said it was a wonderful reread. I love both Emma and Knightley so much. I have to say, although they are 2 of my favorite of all Austen's main characters, I did find myself struggling at times with the plot pacing this time around. Regardless, it is a great book, a true gem, and I love so many elements of the story. And another thing, now that I've reread this, I have read all of Austen's works at least twice, which is wonderful. I'm so glad. But yeah, I really, really loved this. I did find myself just a little bogged down at times with the pacing, but I think I'm going to share a separate video with more about Emma, just because there's so much I wanted to talk about pertaining to Emma and her matchmaking. And she's not the only matchmaker in this book. There is another character who I think she learned a lesson or 2 about matchmaking from. So there's just so much to get from this book. And yeah, we'll save that for another video where I'll be here for a while. Then finally, for Jane Austen July, I read Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. And I have the dust jacket somewhere. This book, tabbed, more tabs. Wow. The reason it took me almost 2 months to read is not because I wasn't enjoying it. This is a 4.5 star book, one of my favorites of the year. It was fantastic. The reason it took me so long is because every single page, almost, led to underlining, tabbing, and internet rabbit holes, and more research. And I just loved this. This is like a treasure trove. It is a treasure trove of authors, some of whom I've never heard about before. And if you know nothing about this book, which I feel like if you know anything about Jane Austen July, you've probably heard a million people talk about it because everyone is reading it right now. It is a newer release and it is just fantastic. Would highly recommend. But this one is written by Rebecca Romney, who is a rare book dealer. And she kind of started this journey of discovering these different women writers who influenced Jane Austen, who either lived before her, wrote before her, or during her time, and were definite literary influences on Jane Austen and her own writing. And the authors she covers are first Jane Austen. There's an entire chapter dedicated to her. And then she goes over Frances Burney, Anne Radcliffe, Charlotte Lennox, Hannah More, Charlotte Smith, Elizabeth Inchbald, Hester Lynch Thrale Piozzi, and Maria Edgeworth. And it's another book where I just took notes and wrote down so many titles of books that I want to read by these authors, books that are about these authors that have to do with just this whole subject, and it was fantastic. So in each chapter, she goes over just a bit of a biographical, I guess, exploration of the author's life, and then she does go over their works. I think she did mention every work written by them, every fictional work at least, but some of the authors here didn't really write fiction. I did want to quickly mention the few authors that really stood out to me. So Frances Burney for sure. I have already read Evelina by her, or Evelina, not sure how to pronounce it, but I love Frances Burney. I love her writing, and this chapter on her just made me so fascinated to learn more about her. So I ended up buying a biography that was mentioned by the author in this book, which I shared in my last book haul. And then she goes over Anne Radcliffe and how she kind of perfected the Gothic genre. With Charlotte Lennox, I also found her very fascinating, and to celebrate one of the books that she published, to celebrate its publication, she gave a party, invited a bunch of literary men, and they all pulled an all-nighter celebrating. I thought that was interesting. She talks about Hannah More, who was a bit more on the prim and proper side. She tended to moralize a lot more, and definitely was not a favorite with Rebecca Romney, and part of that is because of how Rebecca Romney was raised, so there is a bit of that bias there. And the way she talked about her, I found just slightly unfair in certain aspects, but that's just my opinion. But I did appreciate that the author says this. She says, when we flatten people from history into icons, i.e. Hannah More, the self-righteous moral authority, Mary Wollstonecraft, the rebellious feminist, Jane Austen, the quiet literary genius, Anne Radcliffe, the mad artist, it is so much harder to recognize their humanity, which is where their artistry ultimately lies. Then she talks about Charlotte Smith, who she wrote to keep her family from financial ruin. She had a very, very difficult marriage, and she did not have the easiest of lives. So writing was the way that she kept her family from starving. Then the beautiful Elizabeth Inchbald, who was a bit of a interesting character. She ran away when very young. She ran away from home and ended up being an actress, and she kind of had an unconventional early adulthood, but she ended up marrying a man much older than her, but they were happily married, and she dabbled in writing plays and was also a published author. And then we have Hester Lynch Thrale Piozzi, who I also found very interesting. This woman was a very, very fascinating woman to read about. She was extremely bold, didn't care what people around her thought about her, and married, her second husband she married was this Italian Catholic man, and even her own daughters were against the marriage, and she just went ahead because she was in love with him, and they were very happy together. And for her 80th birthday, she threw a huge birthday party. This woman just seems like such a fun time. So that is Hester Piozzi, and I'm very intrigued to read at least one of her works. And then also Maria Edgeworth, who was also an interesting woman, probably one that I'm less interested to learn more about. But she did write a couple books set in Ireland that I'm really curious to read. And yeah, that was Maria Edgeworth. And those were the authors that she talks about in this book. I found it so fascinating. The whole point in this book is to discuss why these women fell from the literary canon. Why are they no longer as reverenced as other male writers of Austen's time? So it was really interesting to see kind of her arguments, and she made some really great ones, that is for sure. I wanted to go back to Frances Burney for a moment here. She was definitely probably my favorite out of all the authors discussed. And I just feel like she would have been so fun to be friends with. She was very fascinating. And she was also a prolific letter writer, and we have tons of her letters available to read, and I really want to read them all. But it says here, Burney recorded the time she once froze because of a question from King George III. He was actually a fan of her work, Evelina, and yes, she was summoned before the king. And this is what she writes in her letter. Then coming up close to me, he said, "But what? How was it?" "Sir," cried I, not well understanding him, how happened it? What? I only wrote, sir, for my own amusement, only in some odd idle hours. But your publishing, your printing, how was that?" "That was only, sir, only because—" I hesitated most abominably. The what was then repeated with so earnest a look that, forced to say something, I stammeringly answered, "I thought, sir, it would look very well in print." I do really flatter myself this is the silliest speech I ever made. And her family just seems like so sweet. And she records that we were merry and laughed as loud as the Burnies always do. And she just seems like such an interesting person with a very interesting personality. She was definitely on the shy side, but I cannot wait to read the biography that I purchased of her. I am so excited to read that. And then one thing that she says about Anne Radcliffe, and I have read The Mysteries of Udolpho by her, and even though the plot was very slow moving, the writing was stunning. This is what the author says about her. Radcliffe showed me how a writer can shape the reader's mood by including atmospheric descriptions of landscapes and architecture that often expose the feelings of the characters. Wuthering Heights feels reborn. H.P. Lovecraft has an entirely new dimension. Most surprising of all, I think of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings trilogy in a different way. Middle-earth is famous as a world of total immersion. The reader takes each step of Frodo's sublime and picturesque journey along with him. Tolkien's tendency to linger in the landscape was baffling to me when I first read it. Now I want to return to Middle-earth with Radcliffean eyes. I bet I'll love those scenes. Then just a random quote about reading. She says, "Reading is a solitary act that nevertheless connects you to others. It sets your interiority ablaze with ideas, connections, disagreements, or pleasures. In the process, you also learn to recognize and to value the world inside your own mind." And the well-known writer Samuel Johnson, who was a friend of many of these women writers, he says this, and this is just kind of, I guess, acknowledging the value of female authorship and that kind of thing. Johnson observed that the revolution of years has now produced a generation of Amazons of the pen, who, with the spirit of their predecessors, have set masculine tyranny at defiance. And that's all I'm going to say, because we will be here all day if I continue talking about this book, but it was just so great. And if you want to hear a much more organized and less rambly review of this book, I will have my friend Sarah's video linked below. Sarah is a wonderful booktuber and had some amazing thoughts to share about this book, so I will have her video linked below where she discusses this, because she did so in a much less rambly manner than I did. But anyways, that is Jane Austen's bookshelf. 4.5 stars, fantastic, and one that I am looking forward to reading again in the future. We've slightly moved and the lighting may be a bit off. I apologize. My ring light has been turning off at random times, just being weird. But anyways, we shall continue, and if it turns off again, we're just gonna talk about books in the dark. That is fine. I have the worst lighting in this room, but we will make do. So those were all the books for Jane Austen July, and there are 4 more books to get through that are separate from that readathon that I read in July and August, and I'm not gonna talk about them in the order that I read them, just because I want to end off with the 5-star, so I'll just kind of go through these randomly, but leaving the 5-star for last. I reread Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is book 2 in the Lunar Chronicle series. This year I started a reread of the series with Cinder, and Scarlet is the second book. And the events of Cinder do continue on, and the characters from Cinder do appear in this book. The entire series kind of follows an overarching plot line with this evil lunar queen, and it is kind of a futuristic series. We are on planet Earth, but in the future. So some countries are different. There is New Beijing and that sort of thing. And in this book, we are introduced to Scarlet Benoit, whose grandmother has gone missing. And she encounters this street fighter named Wolf, and he seems to know something about her grandmother's disappearance and some political intrigue and all of that. And Cinder, who is halfway across the world, is dealing with her own stuff. And if you haven't read the series, I don't want to say kind of what happens in book 1. It is a spoiler. So anyways, it's an adventure-filled book. The characters do end up meeting, and it is so fun. I really enjoy the series, and I'm so glad I'm rereading it. The character Scarlet, she is just a little on the abrasive side, but you learn why she is the way she is, and I guess the very difficult things she's gone through and yada yada. But anyways, a fun book, a fun series. And as someone who's not huge into sci-fi and fantasy, this series is definitely an exception out of several exceptions. But yeah, it's one that I know I will read again and again in the future. It is just loads of fun. I love this series so much. I also read We Solve Murders by Richard Osman, and it is the first book in a new series he's writing. And I enjoyed this. I gave it 3.5 stars. It definitely is not at the same level for me as his Thursday Murder Club series. The premise is interesting. We have Amy, who is this private security guard in a way to this very famous author. Her job is to keep her alive, and threats appear, and that job gets all the more complicated. And then her father-in-law, I can't remember if he was like a private investigator before retiring, but he did investigation work before his retirement, and he's kind of pulled out of retirement by Amy. He gets pulled into everything that's going on with her. So he is her father-in-law. She is married to his son, who isn't really in the book all that much. He's off doing his own thing. But it is a really, really fast-paced, crazy story, lots of plot threads, and I just struggled to keep everything straight. I struggled to keep all the plot lines straight and all the character names. It was just a lot. It was a lot, and I did struggle with it. But I did enjoy it. So I listened to it mainly on audio, some physical reading, but mostly on audio while like working on a puzzle. I did enjoy the audiobook. I thought the narrator did a great job. There's murder, there's money smuggling, there's just so much going on, and it's a wild ride, and we travel around the world with these characters to the Caribbean and to Ireland, and it's crazy. Just so much happens, and just now having finished it weeks ago, it feels like I can barely remember anything about it. I do think the characterization was great. I really enjoyed how Steve and Amy were portrayed in particular, and I do find them memorable, which is interesting. Amy wasn't super likable. She was quite standoffish, and I feel like that was purposeful. The way the author wrote her was very well done. She's a product of her environment. She is the way she is because of how she grew up, and Steve himself is struggling with grief after losing his wife, and the exploration of grief was very well done. And I also think Richard Osman is fantastic at writing in present tense. It is not my preferred narration style at all. I will always take past tense over present tense, but he does it so well, and yeah, his writing is fantastic. Really, really great writer. And I'm so glad there will be another Thursday Murder Club book coming out, I think this fall, I think actually this month. And yeah, I am definitely looking forward to that a lot more than the next book in this series. But either way, it was overall enjoyable. Just it doesn't compare to the Thursday Murder Club, in my personal opinion, just with my personal reading tastes. But yeah, 3.5-star read. I did enjoy it. This next book was such a fun mystery. I brought it with me on a trip to a cottage with my family, and I read a good chunk there, and I just could not put it down. And that is Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is the first book in the Peter Wimsey series, and I was so intimidated to start the series. I have heard so much about Dorothy Sayers, just about her writing and her very in-depth education, and she was just such a fascinating and smart woman, and is considered to be kind of an honorary Inklings member. She did know C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, people like that, the very intelligent, very literary people of her day, and I was just intimidated to start the series. And I had heard multiple people say this may not be the best place to start with the series, just because it introduces Lord Peter, and the writing style is a little eccentric. Lord Peter is very eccentric, and I don't know, just multiple people had said to maybe not start with this one, maybe start with the second or third, or even much later in the series if you don't mind being spoiled as it pertains to Lord Peter's love life. So I decided to just start from the very beginning. That's how I usually like to do things. I just don't like the idea of starting with a later book and then coming back and whatever. But anyways, I do see how this could probably put people off from continuing the series, but it sure did not put me off. I ended up immediately purchasing books 2, 3, and 4, and I wanted to get them all in this edition. So you can see book 2 is in the same edition, which is the Hotter Books edition. And I ordered these from Indigo, and the images for books 2, 3, and 4 were all this edition. But book 3 and 4 did not come in the right edition. Anyways, book 2 is Clouds of Witness. I'm not even upset though. I really like these covers. They're also Hotter editions, but I guess maybe a newer design. But anyways, book 3 and 4, I'm not sure which is which, but we have Lord Peter Views the Body and A Natural Death. And I do really like these covers. I was just kind of surprised that they're not the same as books 1 and 2. But anyways, I loved book 1. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was great. And I ordered book 2, 3, and 4 because I want to continue the series ASAP. But anyways, in Whose Body, we're introduced to Lord Peter Wimsey. He is the second son of a duke. His older brother is now the duke, so he is just the second son. And he is a gentleman who has very interesting hobbies. He likes to solve murders. mysteries, etc. And he also loves to collect antiquarian books, and he often sends his butler off to go and bid on different books that are being auctioned. And I love his hobbies and how passionate he is, and he's witty and sarcastic and funny and a little flamboyant, and he is just such a fun character. I do believe he's in his 20s in this first book. He's quite young, and it is set just a few years after the end of World War I, so the Great War, and he is also dealing with PTSD, and this book had more depth to it than I was expecting with, you know, that exploration of PTSD. And his butler, Bunter, he actually was, he fought with him in the war as well. So he's more than just a butler, he's also a friend. So the premise of this book, we have a dead body found in a bathtub at this random person's house. Initially, the police think he is a missing, well-known businessman. This body, in fact, does not belong to that businessman, and so now there are two mysteries, a missing businessman and this dead body. And Lord Peter inserts himself into the investigation, much to the chagrin of the law enforcement. And one of the investigators is Inspector Parker, I think, and he is good friends with Lord Peter, and I really enjoyed every time he was on page as well. There is a bit of a Sherlock Watson vibe to the two of them, and there are references to Sherlock Holmes as well by Lord Peter, which I thought was just fun. It's not a perfect 5-star book. I thought it was pretty obvious who the guilty party was from almost the moment we meet the character, and just kind of where the mystery was going to go. Certain aspects of it I found predictable, but overall, it was a solid mystery. I like that the story is very dialogue heavy, and we really do follow directly in Lord Peter's footsteps as he is trying to solve this mystery. Nothing is left hidden from the reader. We are there right beside him, and I really enjoyed that. I also wanted to mention this is not super cozy. There are pretty blunt and straightforward descriptions of things like cadavers and experiments done on them, and it's quite gruesome, I will say. Something else that I found really interesting was the author's choice in narration. It was mostly told in third person past tense, but there are a few moments in the story where it switches to second person narrations. So it's like we're a character there following. Just as an example, I really like the opening to this chapter. It says, "The vile raw fog tore your throat and ravaged your eyes. You could not see your feet. You stumbled in your walk over poor men's graves. The feel of Parker's old trench coat beneath your fingers was comforting. You had felt it in worse places. You clung on now for fear you would get separated." So it's Lord Peter, but it's kind of like we're in his shoes, which I really enjoyed. So with Lord Peter, he is eccentric and he has very odd ways of expressing himself at times. It did take me a little bit to get used to the writing style just because of how Lord Peter talks, and he has a dry humor about him, and I really enjoyed that. And one quote that I really liked, and he says this, "Hate anything tiresome happening before breakfast. Takes a man at such a confounded disadvantage." And I definitely agree. He gives off this, I'm just laid back and, just kind of doing my own thing, but there is more depth to him, and I feel like we'll get more throughout the rest of the series. But anyways, that was Whose Body. I can't wait to continue with the series. I know I have some gems waiting for me, and I know Murder Must Advertise, and I'm forgetting the other one. I think it's Gaudy Night. The Literary Life podcast did episodes on those, so I'm really excited to get to those books, which are much later in the series, but eventually. So that was Whose Body. I would definitely recommend. And the final book I read in the last couple of months that I have to talk about is The Hopkins Manuscript by R.C. Sheriff. I am still so surprised that this is a 5-star read and one of my favorite reads of the year, considering it is science fiction. It's a classic science fiction novel. It was written in 1939, just before World War II broke out, and that makes the reading experience, knowing when it was written, when it was published, makes the reading experience that much more poignant, and it's so crazy to think about when you read this book and you really ruminate on the themes, just knowing that the world was about to enter another very dark period in history. And this book was fantastic. I buddy read this with Jen from Jen's Reading Life, and she also very much enjoyed it, and we had such great discussions about the book as well, and I just went nuts with the tabbing. It is so good. Such a wonderful, wonderful book, and I can't believe that a science fiction novel made it to my favorites list. It was published in 1939, but the author opens the story in the 1940s. It's kind of set in what I would consider to be an alternate England. So it is England in the 1940s, but obviously there is no World War II because the author wrote this before that happened. Things are just off. Things feel a little bit off. There's just this undercurrent of this isn't quite right. And it's quite significant thinking about the fact that the war was happening during this time when you're reading the book. And it does open hundreds of years into the future. At the very beginning of the book, we are hundreds of years into the future. And this group of scientists from the West, so more from the Middle East, are exploring the East. So they're coming and exploring England and Europe and the ruins of civilizations that are no more. And this cataclysm had occurred where the moon crashed into the earth. Obviously, science, that's not possible. That would never happen. But in this book, in this world, the moon has crashed into the earth. We know that from the beginning, although we don't get to watch it play out until later in the book. But the scientists are trying to piece history together because they know nothing about England from after the Roman conquest. And it's so interesting. Just the way it opened, I was immediately hooked. They find this Hopkins manuscript that tells the story of this cataclysm, this disaster, this thing that completely changed the world. And it is written by Edward Hopkins, who is our main character. And this entire book is told from his perspective. And what a fascinating character, what a fascinating read. Edgar, our main character, is part of this British Lunar Society, and he is one of the very few who find out before the rest of the world finds out that the earth is going to crash into it, and he has to keep this secret, and all the while preparing for basically the end of the world. There's just so much meat to this book. There is so much that is discussion worthy, and I could talk about it for a very long time, and I don't want to take too much time to talk about it just because there's so much. I have so many page numbers that I wrote down that have amazing quotes, and just the writing was absolutely beautiful. And that's one thing that I loved about it so much is the writing. R.C. Sheriff, he also wrote A Fortnight in September, and it was just such a beautiful story of a family vacationing. It's very simple. And even in this book, his writing was just delightful to read. And he had such a way of creating this sense of doom, this impending doom and paranoia, and also beautiful descriptions of the English countryside and the view of the moon. And it was just beautifully written. I just love this passage here. It says, "Nature presented us with a succession of perfect autumn days. Dawn after dawn rose up in clear-skied radiance. Mellowed afternoons pursued the sunset and bathed in its glow until the shadows of the beech trees were stretched like fine elastic to the full breadth of the meadow, only to be snapped with the nip of twilight." The author did a fantastic job of exploring human nature and how we react to, big life-altering news. And it kind of goes back to how people would have, had to just continue on with their lives, with the outbreak of the war, the Great War, and then World War II, and life moves on. You still have to work and provide food for your family, and people were still celebrating Christmas after they found out what was going to happen. And it's just so thought-provoking. How would we react if we were told that our lives would be obliterated, the earth would be obliterated, potentially? And a quote that kind of reminded me of the war, the Great War, and the ties between, wars and battles and this book. It said, "Death in the company of a fine man can become a brave adventure." And it just made me think maybe that's how some younger people, coped with having to go and fight in these wars. The author looks at denial and optimism and faith, fatalism, acceptance, that kind of thing, the different ways we can react to, this type of tragedy. There's a really deep look into community versus isolation, and do you face this alone or do you face this with people? And I just thought that was really interesting and thought-provoking as well. There's pretty strong commentary later in the book on colonization and power and political power, which I found interesting. And just this idea that the greatest world powers, they all think they are untouchable, but ultimately we are all the same, and no one is exempt from natural disasters. No one is exempt from calamity. And it was just, it was fascinating. It was so fascinating. And I definitely would reread this in the future. And I feel like I would get even more on a reread, even though I got quite a lot from it. It was fantastic. One I would highly recommend if you do like modern classics and these kind of deeper novels where there's so much under the surface. Beautiful writing, not usually my cup of tea, but it did get 5 stars for me as I'm still thinking about it, and I just found it so memorable. just a fantastic read. So those were the books that I finished in the last couple of months, and I am so sad. There were a few more that I really wanted to finish in August and did not get a chance to, just with everything going on, but I do plan on restarting A Month in the Country. I am about halfway through. It's so short, but I feel like it's such a deep book, and I didn't give the first half enough of my mental energy and attention, so I do want to restart this, and if I don't get to it now, that's fine. I will save it for next summer, as this is the type of book that I definitely feel like you should read in the summertime, towards the end of summer. It's set at the end of summer as well, so I like seasonal books and that kind of thing. Anyways, that is A Month in the Country. I'll see if I do end up reading that. I was buddy reading Castle Richmond as well by Anthony Trollope with my friend Elizabeth, and I'm still only that far through. I am so sad because I was so enjoying this book, but again, I just could not pick it up. I could not read it. Every time I tried, that mental block, I could not focus, couldn't read it. So I think this one I will also pick back up and try to finish in September, because I do have some other books I really want to read for Victober, and I don't want this one to drag into Victober. There's another Anthony Trollope book I want to read in October. But anyways, that is Castle Richmond. Fingers crossed I will finish this soon. This next book I started with my friend Tammy. It is Sovereign by C.J. Sansom, and I feel so bad, but it's just not holding my attention right now, and it's just not the right time for me to be reading this. I got about that far through. It's book 3 in the Matthew Shardlake series, which I love. I loved book 2 so much. Darkfire got 5 stars for me, and this one I just want to be able to be fully immersed in Tudor England, and now is just not the time. So this one is a temporary DNF. And I have not picked up Beatrix Potter, A Life in Nature since June, so we are in the same spot since June. I really want to finish this as well. It's not because I wasn't enjoying it. I was loving it, but then Jane Austen July started, and I started Jane Austen's Bookshelf, which I don't really like reading multiple nonfictions at the same time. So this one was kind of like I'm gonna set this aside and finish it in August. That didn't happen. We'll see when I get to it, but I do plan on picking this back up very soon, hopefully this week. And the other book that I was determined to read in August and did not start it, and I just realized it is one of 2 other books I was determined to start, actually 3. Oh my gosh. Anyways, I was gonna read The Shell Seekers by Rosamund Pilcher. Didn't start it, but I can still read it in September. And then her book titled September, I will save for next September, because I really want to read that in the month of September, because I have to, because it's titled September. And then I was also supposed to start Dante, The Divine Comedy by Dante, and The Beginner's Guide to Dante's Divine Comedy by Jason Baxter for the 100 Days of Dante event, reading challenge hosted by, I forget the university's name, but I will have the website linked below. And it is basically just going through the entirety of the Divine Comedy in 100 days from the end of August until Easter of next year. So I have lots of time to catch up. I've only missed, I think, a week, 2 weeks, I'm not sure. I'm losing track of time, but I will start that very soon. I just, wasn't able to read in August, so, or all that much. I was able to read a little, just the last 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, not very much. But one thing that has kind of brought some joy and excitement into my life that I feel really helped me get back into the swing of things with reading is getting these 3 books that I've already shared. In the last book haul, these had not yet arrived, even though I had ordered them before, but these 3 books arriving made me very excited. And then I'm not going to save this for another book haul, just because the rest of this year I'm really intentionally slowing it down with book buying. But I ordered these beautiful editions of Edith Wharton books from the 80s. And here are the spines. And they were used. I got them for an amazing price, and they were being sold by a wonderful artist that I follow on Instagram. Her name is Haley, and I will have her Instagram linked below. Her artwork is absolutely gorgeous. If you have not heard of her Instagram page or her artwork, I highly recommend that you go give her a follow. Oh, and this is her website as well, Sweet Sequels. And this bookmark that came with the books is just a little hobbit hole there. That is her painting. And I am obsessed. And this is also her artwork. But anyways, she was selling these books and I couldn't pass them up. Oh my gosh. These are all Edith Wharton books I have not yet read. I've only read Ethan Frome. That's it. My next one that I'm going to read is The Age of Innocence, which I have in a different edition. But these 5 books, I do own one of them also in a different edition, but it's such an ugly edition. I am more than happy to get rid of it. I got it at a used bookstore. I don't need that on my shelves when I have the book and the edition I'm about to show you. But the first one here is Summer. And like I said, these are from the 80s, so they definitely have a bit of an 80s feel to them. But I'm just obsessed with the cover design. They all have the same style there. This is Roman Fever and Other Stories. I'm assuming these are short stories. I did not know she wrote short stories, but that is Roman Fever. Oh my gosh, I love this cover. The book I was talking about that I have a very ugly edition of is this one, The House of Mirth. So I will be getting rid of that one and reading from this stunning edition. It is beautiful. I love it. Then there is Old New York. Now, if any of you have read Old New York, is there anything about it that is autumnal? Because I couldn't tell by the summary, but this cover is screaming fall. So if there's anything at all to do with fall in this story, please let me know, because I will prioritize that one. And this one's a bit more battered. I do have to add some tape here. You can see the cover is a little battered, but this one is The Custom of the Country. Also love that cover, and I love the back. So receiving these just brought me so much joy and definitely was a bit of an inspiration in making me want to get back into the swing of things with reading, because I have missed it. I just have not been able to read. I have not been able to read. It's been difficult, but that is it for this video. It was quite long. I am so appreciative if you've stayed until the end. Please do leave a book emoji in the comments below if you've stuck around. I really, really appreciate each of you for taking time out of your day to watch my videos and listen to me ramble on and on. I'm a huge rambler, and all of you being here is very much appreciated. But friends, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one, whenever that is. Bye.